Hello everybody, and welcome to the next video on functions. This video is dedicated exclusively to functions that pass by reference. So this was a concept that was introduced last time. It is a concept that takes a while to get used to, just like many of the topics in this course. Students typically have trouble getting used to passing by reference, especially because it's a function topic, and functions in general can be hard to get used to. So in this video, I will just show you several more examples, building on the examples that we did last time. So just to recall what we did last time, you can pass a variable in one of two ways. You can pass it by value, which means that only the value of the variable gets handed to the function. So you have a box with a value in it, right? The function then creates a new box and puts the value of the old box in the new box. That's passing by value. Passing by reference means don't just pass the value of that box, pass the box itself to the function, so that what happens to that box in the function is remembered back in main. So in the case of passing by reference, the function doesn't create a copy variable. It doesn't create a new variable. Okay, so it doesn't create a new box. So you don't just hand the value of the box over, you hand the box itself over, and therefore things that happen in the function are remembered back up in main. So recall this from the previous video. If you pass a variable x by value, the value of the variable is not changed in main, because the box itself where that value was not messed with. After the function is done running, the value of x is the same back up in main. On the other hand, if you pass by reference, the program back up in main will remember what happened to that variable in the function. So passing by value is memoryless back up in main, but passing by reference, main remembers that. So why would you pass something by reference? I mentioned this a little bit last time, but there are basically three reasons why you want to pass by reference. The first is that maybe you want the value of the variable to be changed up in main. Also, maybe you want to trick a function into returning more than one value. So the example of that I will show you is this. If you want to solve a quadratic equation, imagine a function doing that. Well, what you would have to hand that function are the coefficients a, b, and c. That's no problem. You can hand a function three values. But a function can only give you back a single value, right? A function can only have one output for a given set of inputs. But as you all know, quadratic equations can have two solutions. So this function has to give you two values back sometimes. So how would you do that? How would you write a function that gives you two values back? Well, on the one hand, it's sort of impossible to do that, but on the other hand, you can trick functions into doing that by passing by reference. And so what I'm going to do in this video is give you two examples of this, and then for item 2 here, I would just do this example, the returning two different solution values. This item 3, I'm not going to show you an example of. I just want to point out that passing by reference saves memory because you don't have to create a new storage space in which to pass by value. So for example, some programmers always pass vectors by reference simply to save memory. Now you have to be careful with that because if you're passing by reference, you are going to change that vector in the function below, possibly. So you have to be careful that you're not changing a vector in the function if you don't want it changed back up in main. Okay, so again, this is just sort of a computer programming pure answer, right? Like if you were a programmer, you would be worried about this. So we're not going to do much with that. I'm just going to show you examples of items 1 and 2. So here are two examples of wanting values of variables changed up in main. First, I'm going to write a function that swaps the values of two variables. So if x has value 2 and y has value 3, I'm going to run the function, and then x will have value 3 and y will have value 2. So just swapping of values. And also I will write a function that replaces all instances of don't like with love inside of a string. So we're going to make our strings more positive. Okay, so first let's think about writing a function that swaps values of integers in main. What would that look like? Well, since all we're doing is swapping two given values, we don't have to return anything. Let me just call this swap. I have to hand it the two guys that I want it to swap. And since I want that swap remembered in main, I'm going to pass by reference. Okay, so now when I actually build the function, notice I already have a couple of functions going. Just ignore that for now. I will talk about them later. Okay, so how would I swap the values of x and y? Well, what I can do is just make copies of them. Oops. Okay, so a has the value of x, b has the value of y, and now just let x equal b, y equal a. All right, so a has the value of x, and now you're copying that on top of y, so that y now has value a. So therefore, y has the old value of x. And b has the value of y. So when you write x equals b, you are giving x the old value of y. So back up here, let's just create a couple of guys. X equals 2, y equals 3. Let's then tell the code, like, swap these guys, please. Okay, and then y equals... Oh, sorry, I just wanted to hand it x and y. Yeah. Okay. And so, oops, it also doesn't like that I have a comma there. Okay. So I'm going to hand it x and y. I'm going to swap them. So x should now have value 3, y should have value 2. And let's just see if that happens. And it does. Okay, so remember, x used to be 2, now it has value 3. Y used to have value 3, now it has value 2. And the reason that is the case is because you handed x itself to this function, right? So the change that happened down here was remembered right there. And you handed y itself to the function by reference. And so this change that happened down here was remembered up there. So here you go. If you ever want to like swap the values of things, and who knows why you might want to do that, right? You can do it up in main like this. And again, one of the nice things about passing by reference, using a void function in this case, is you can write things that make sense in English. Like swap x and y is how you would read that in English. Okay, so that's nice. You can make the code itself mirror the English that you yourself would use if you were just doing this on your own, right? Not even on a computer. Okay, for my next example, I will write a function that replaces all instances of don't like with love. So what would that look like? Let's call this so don't like to love. And what do I have to do? I have to give it the string I want it to change. And since I want this change remembered up in main, I will pass by reference. So now I need to build the function itself. And what would that look like? Okay, so what I have to do is I have to take the string A, and every time I see the phrase don't like, I have to replace it with the word love. And so how would that work? Well, we've done this several times now, so I'm not going to spend a whole ton of time on it. But I'm just going to go through the string, position by position, and see if what I'm currently looking at is the phrase don't like. And if it is, then I'll replace it. So if what I'm currently looking at, a.substring, where I currently am, okay, so don't like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are 10 characters in don't like. There are 8 letters, 1 apostrophe, and 1 space. So I need to ask if what I see of length 10 is don't like. Then what I should do is I should a.erase. I should start where I am and delete the next 10 characters to get rid of that don't like. And then a.insert at that position, I should insert love. Okay, so again, we have done this multiple times now, but what this is doing is, like, these two lines, right? It's saying wherever I am right now, at position I erase the next 10 characters. Oh, and also at position I, go ahead and insert the string love. So I'm just going through the string position by position and asking, hey, the next 10 characters that I'm looking at now, are those 10 characters don't like? And if they are, I will get rid of them and replace them with love. Okay, so let's just test this back up in main. Let me get rid of this now. So string, let's get something from the user. So cn input. And I'll say, here's what you meant to say. Cout input. Oh, but before I tell somebody what I meant to say, I need to make that thing positive. So don't like to love input. And so again, look at how nicely this English mirrors what's actually happening, right? So I gave this function a nice name so that you can tell exactly what's happening when I write this command. I'm going to take the string input and make all the don't likes into loves. Okay, so let's see if this works. So I'll write something that is sort of scandalously untrue here. I don't like Dr. McEwen, right? So you're in a fit of rage because whatever, the homework took you longer to do than you meant or than you wanted it to, but you know, even though we have dark times together, you didn't mean to say that. You know, it's sort of a fit of passion here. What you meant to say was love, right? So anyway, you can of course test that this works more than once. Right, so it will replace all of them because it's going just position by position, like, oh, position 0, I see it, don't like. And then a position, whatever this is, position, well, it becomes position 5 or something because this love gets overwritten all of this, you know. So anyway, you're just going through replacing all don't likes with loves. But again, the important thing to take away from this example is this input was don't like, don't like, don't like. Then you fed that string into this function, but you didn't feed it by value. You fed it by reference, right? So down here, the input box itself in memory becomes the A box in memory. So input and A are identical, not just their value, but also their place in memory. So what happens to the string A right here also happens to input, because input and A are now literally the same. They don't just have the same value, they are the same in the computer's memory. Okay, so here are just sort of two more examples to add to our little toolbox here. Okay, notice I still have my string find function here. So another way you could have written this function is like this. So you can call on other functions inside of functions if you want to. So let's let int x equal our string find. I want it to look inside of A. I want it to find don't like, and I want it to initially start at the beginning, right? So as long as, our string find, as long as x is not equal to -1, so as long as we are finding something, what should we do? We should erase at that spot. Erase there. Stop. I don't know what that is. Erase, erase, and then start our search again, but make sure we don't start. Oh yeah, we can start at the beginning again because we got rid of don't like, right? So we'll just say, okay, we'll keep looking, you know. You can go ahead and start from the beginning again if you want to. So this code will do the same thing. The only reason I show it to you is just to point out that you can call on other functions you've built inside of new functions you've built. So let's just see how this works. You know, let's do the same sort of scandalously untrue phrase here. All right, so it works the same way because all it's doing is just finding each instance of don't like, and every time it finds one, it replaces it. And as soon as you don't find an instance, so as soon as x becomes -1, you stop looking. Okay, So one more example here. I want to show you an example of tricking a function into returning more than one value. So what I'm going to do is write a function that gives you back on some level, right? It doesn't literally return both solutions of a quadratic equation, but you trick it into doing that. And I note here parenthetically, you can already kind of do this with vectors, but I want to show you how you can do this with passing by reference. So the way to do it with vectors is like this. I've already written it for you, so let me just talk you through this. If you're going to solve a quadratic equation, you can hand it, you have to hand it the three coefficients. Maybe those three coefficients are floats, but for our purposes, I just assumed that you're going to hand it integers. So what you can do is you can just create a list of solutions. That list will either contain nothing if there are no solutions. It might contain one thing if there's exactly one solution. Otherwise, that list will contain two solutions. So notice how I built this function. If what's under that square root in the quadratic formula is negative, then you have no real solutions. So you would just return an empty vector, which means that you had no solution. If what's under that square root is 0, then you only get a single solution, and it's given by this, negative b over 2a. So the third case is where you actually get two solutions. If what's under the square root is positive, that's the only thing that's left here, you get your two real live solutions from the quadratic formula. So you just throw both of those into that solutions vector and return that. So this function here will either return an empty vector if there are no solutions, a vector with a single number in it if you have a single solution, or a vector with two solutions in it if you have two solutions. So all of this to say, you can also trick functions into sort of, quote, returning more than one value, end quote, by having it return vectors, by having it return a list. So anyway, I just wanted to have this here for you to see that you don't have to use passing by reference. Here's another way to do it. So when I put this code up on Moodle, I'll leave this in there as another way you could solve quadratic equations. Okay, but for now, let's build solve quadratic equation. So for this function to work, I of course still have to hand it the three coefficients. If you don't give it the three coefficients, it can't do anything. It has to know what the equation is. But I'm also going to hand it some solution values. Oops. And you have no reason to think that they are integer. Float solution 2. And I'm going to pass these by reference. So what's going to happen is I'm going to hand the function three variables that actually have values in them. So I'm going to tell it what A, B, and C are. Then I'm going to just hand it two solution variables that, before the function runs, have no value in them at all. And the value of these variables will be assigned during the function. But since I passed by reference, that solving of the equation inside of the function will be remembered in main when you are done. Okay, so let's come down here and build this. Okay, so if, what happens? Okay, so if b times b minus 4 times a times c is 0, then what happens is solution 1 is assigned the value, and let me just copy it from down here. Where do you go? Negative b over 2a. So if what's under the square root is 0, then you just get back the value, negative b plus root 0 over 2a. Else, if b times b minus 4 times a times c, 4 times a times c is positive, then I know I get two solutions back. Oh, and I guess up here I should be also telling it that solution 2 is the same thing, right? So you do actually get both guys a value, they're just the same. Otherwise, if you get some real life solutions, let me again copy and paste the code from down here, just so I don't have to write it again. Okay, so where are we? Up here. So solution 1 is that, and then solution 2 is the same thing, but you switch the negative right there. So negative b plus root stuff, right? Negative b minus root stuff. Okay, so what's going to happen is, in main, I'm going to give this guy a quadratic function. So let me just get rid of all of this. So let's say int a equals, I don't know, 1, b equals 0, c equals negative 1. So you're talking about x squared minus 1 is 0, right? That equation, as you all know, has two solutions. Oops, I keep doing this, comma. X squared minus 1 equals 0 has two solutions, plus or minus 1. So what I'm going to do now is just create a couple of solution variables. I'm going to say solve quadratic equation A, B, C, solution 1, solution 2. So once this function is done running, solution 1 and solution 2 will have values. So now I can say your solutions are, and I can just print them. Solution 1, solution 2. So let's see what that does. Solutions are 1 and negative 1. Okay, good. That's what they were supposed to be. Let me just change this to like a 5 or something. So now you're talking about 5x squared minus 1 is 0, which also has solutions. Your solutions are these. What is this? This is plus root 1/5, and this is minus root 1/5, right? But anyway, so what's happening here is solution 1 and solution 2 have no values right now. But you give the variables themselves to the function. So down here, when you actually assign values to them, that value assignment down here is remembered back up in main. So what you're doing is you're tricking this function into returning these two values to you. Okay, so it's nice. So if you really wanted to beef up this program to make it a quadratic equation solver, you would say here, right, if b times b minus 4 times a times c is 0, then like don't do anything. Okay, and then you would say, otherwise, and you come down here, otherwise you would actually solve the equation because you can solve it now. And then here you'd be like, if solution 1 equals solution 2, you would just say the solution is, and just print out whichever one of them you feel like. Oops, and then otherwise, you would print out this. So here's what like a full quadratic equation solving program would look like. If there's no real solution, there's no reason to hand things to the solver itself. Although you could actually put this stuff down in the function also. Like you could have down here, if b times b minus 4ac is less than 0, then just print no solution if you want to. So you can set the thing up however you want. You can outsource as much code as you want to the function. But in any case, if there actually is one solution, either one of them or two of them, you can now solve the equation and get those solution 1 and solution 2 values from the function itself. So again, just like last time, let me point out that one of the nice things about doing this is you can now write English up here. You can call this, solve this quadratic equation for me, please, right? Like you can call it whatever you want. And then when you or somebody else looks at the code later, it's pretty clear what you're trying to get the code to do, right? So when I grade it, for example, or if another programmer were to come along and look at your work, you almost don't need comments in the code anymore if you're willing to do this sort of thing, to tell people exactly what you're trying to get this code to do. Okay, so I'm at the end of my examples, so hopefully this helps clear up whatever confusion you had about passing by reference, and hopefully now you can see why it is useful. So the main takeaway from this video are these things. that passing by reference is useful because you can have the variable value changed back up in main if you want. You can save memory if you want. And finally, you can trick the function into returning more than one value if you want, as we did in this example here with the quadratic equation.